Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride and I'm joined this evening by two excellent guests. Firstly, by the co-chair of the Aberdeen Independence Movement and potential candidate for the Aberdeenshire West constituency in next May's election, Fatima Joji. Fatima, how are you doing this evening?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure as always. And on the other side, we have Andrew Wilson from the All Under One Banner organisation. Andrew, how are you doing this evening?
Kenny, I'm doing well, thank you. It's great to be here.
Excellent. Well, we start this evening, as we always do, with our coronavirus statistics update. And as of 2 p.m. today, a total of 879,348 people in Scotland have been tested through NHS Scotland labs and UK government regional testing centres. Of these, 835,312 were confirmed negative, 50,752 were positive. There are 1,351 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Scotland today, and sadly, there are 13 new reported deaths. Of course, this will be an underestimate of the total number of cases, as not everyone with the virus will display symptoms, and not everyone will necessarily get themselves tested. As always, we urge you, if you are showing any symptoms of the virus, then please do book a test as soon as you can. Of the people who have tested positive, there were 601 people in hospital last night, 51 of whom were in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the coronavirus infection now stands at 2,585. This number only includes those who have died in hospital having received a positive test for the virus. And the latest UK daily figures available show that 43,293 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness, an increase of 138 since yesterday. This number refers to deaths in all settings, though, not just in hospitals. And travellers arriving in Scotland from Italy, San Marino, and the Vatican will be required to quarantine at home or another specified address for 14 days as of 4 a.m. this Sunday. This is due to significant increases in the number of cases testing positive for coronavirus, as well as the increased number of cases in those particular areas. Meanwhile, those arriving from mainland Greece and the Greek islands, except for Mykonos, will no longer need to quarantine due to the low number of cases there. This change is also effective from Sunday morning. And before we go on with the rest of tonight's news, just to let you know, if you'd like to join the conversation here, you can do so on Twitter by following us at Broadcast Scot and using the hashtag Scotland at 7. As you can see, we'll be flashing some of those tweets up during the show, so do please get in touch. Our first story tonight, the Covert Human Intelligence Sources Criminal Conduct Bill was passed in the House of Commons this evening by 313 votes to 98. Shadow Finance Secretary Dan Carden MP quit the Labour front bench over the party's failure to oppose the legislation, which allows UK state spies, undercover agents or police to break the law with impunity. Commenting on the passing of the bill, the SNP's Shadow Home and Justice Secretary Joanna Cherry MP said, "For the Tories to push ahead with this bill without ensuring clear and specific limits preventing the authorisation of the commission of serious offences including murder, torture and sexual offences, and without proper oversight and scrutiny mechanisms is wrong and irresponsible. This bill sets us apart from other Five Eyes countries, including Canada and the USA, some of our closest allies. All proposals and efforts to rectify this and work with the UK government from the SNP and the Scottish government have fallen on deaf ears. We have been ignored once again. This bill could have a serious impact on civil liberties and the rule of law, yet the Tories have rushed it through anyway, voting down sensible cross-party amendments, including that of the Joint Security and Intelligence Committee. Although, given the Tories' historic disregard for the rule of law, we shouldn't be at all surprised." Andrew, I wonder, first of all, what do you make of this bill, and particularly, I think at this point, the Labour Party's desire to abstain, to not take a position on it?
Kenny, I think it shows again just how unsustainable the Labour Party is becoming, certainly in Scotland, but potentially more broadly across the British Isles. The determination to abstain on something as serious as this is an inexcusable dereliction of duty. Joanna's statement is absolutely correct. The lack of limits here, so potentially any crime committed on the instruction of a minister, it can be carried out with impunity, and also there is no oversight by judicial authorities, for example. So obtaining a wiretap or opening up the post is a more onerous task than a minister authorising, as Joanna suggested, very serious crimes up to and including murder and sexual assault. So it shows that the Labour Party isn't fit for purpose at the moment, and it also shows that the Westminster government, especially when you combine this with the Westminster government's determination to break international law, to break domestic law, and to take to itself powers that it hasn't had. That it hasn't had for a very long time in order to attack Scotland and attack the people of Scotland. I think it's a very dangerous situation, and I think it's another indication as to why we need to pursue independence and pursue it quickly.
We saw the spy cops scandal emerge a few years ago, and this is partially what this bill is in response to. But the problem there was the lack of oversight, was the kind of things that those undercover cops mostly were getting up to, and not being kind of supervised enough. Why do you think the Tories have gone with this angle of even less supervision, even less limits on what agents are able to do?
Well, I think there's maybe an argument that the current administration is the current Westminster administration is malign. I think there's plenty of evidence of that malignant behaviour. I think they recognise that with the size of majority they have, they can pretty much do as they wish, and they are determined to do so without some of the checks and balances that you might otherwise expect. Their refusal to engage in any meaningful way with it. Parts of the media, for example, would be one attempt at a check and balance, and so I think it shows a Westminster government which is out of control, and which is determined to seek to take to itself as many powers as it possibly can, as quickly as it can, and the concern is then that having taken those powers, it's going to use them.
Now, Fatima, to come to you, one of the other things that we saw during the spy cops scandal was that the police were investigating far more left-wing environmental groups. Things like the Stephen Lawrence Justice Campaign was being infiltrated by undercover cops, and at the same time, right-wing extremist groups were not being investigated in anything like the same depth. How concerned are you about how this may affect those kinds of groups that are investigated?
That I think it will make it very difficult for us to hold anyone to account, to make them accountable, because we're seeing a bill that was rushed through. And if we're looking at past practices, when we consider what kind of cases they choose to target, there's a lot of discrimination in that. And I would like to be reassured that the Human Rights Act will be considered in these authorisations. And because the bill was rushed through, we're not going to get any guarantee of that. So it will give more space for them to be discriminatory, and not only that, break laws in the course of that discrimination. And they can justify it now because they have this legal backing, which is flawed, I believe. Setting a really dangerous precedent, and it's going to take us backwards in terms of equalities and efforts to actually be fair in our process, our judicial processes, because we're seeing marginalised communities that have very, very little judicial support in the first place, are going to be the targets of this if we look at past practices. So yeah, dangerous precedents are going to be set, and I'm worried about the communities that are going to be targeted because of this.
And when you look at, as we said, the Labour Party abstained again on this bill today. A frontbencher resigned because he felt he had to take a stand on it. What do you think is happening in the Labour Party there? What do you think the strategy is in not standing up against this?
Strategy, I think lack of strategy would be the correct term, actually. The Labour Party has demonstrated time and time again that they have absolutely no clarity in their stance. There's some things that you can't sit on the fence about, and this is something like it. So to be honest, I'm struggling to understand why the Labour Party feel it's appropriate to abstain in situations like this. I don't know what they're trying to achieve here, because the reason why they have lost so much support is because of their lack of a stance on any issue, their lack of clarity. So this strategy or lack of strategy and their inability to learn from it is completely worrying for a government that says they want to lead a country.
And Andrew, just to come back to you quickly, there have been a number of occasions recently where this government has, or this government and its predecessor, in fact, have had run-ins with the law. There was the challenge over proroguing Parliament. There's the talk about with not following international law with the Internal Market Bill. How are lawyers reacting to this? Is there a sense that, oh, well, great, there's going to be a whole lot more claims to make and we're going to be busy? Or is there a kind of concern about what kind of government we have now?
Oh, Kenny, I think there is there's definitely growing concern amongst lawyers. The law is, if the law looks stupid, or the law is in a position where it is being used in a malignant way against the population, very quickly the law loses its authenticity and loses its power. And so that lawyers seeking to attempt to make a system which is losing credibility, it makes it very difficult for the lawyers, and they start to feel that they too are agents of the state. So I think across the political spectrum, lawyers are concerned about these developments, and I think they can see that as part of the overall attack on what we would take to be legal norms by this government, its intention to withdraw from various human rights protections, its determination to move away from some of the protections which European law gives us, and signalling at all levels from Westminster about attacking the judiciary, attacking lawyers who are doing their jobs upholding the law. It's a cause for grave concern at all levels, and I think that concern is only going to grow.
Well, we will keep an eye on that, but we do move on now. And France's President Emmanuel Macron has led EU leaders in sending Boris Johnson an uncompromising message at a summit in Brussels that the UK must swallow the bloc's conditions or expect to face a no-deal outcome in the ongoing trade negotiations. Far from seeking to sugarcoat the EU position as the Prime Minister considers whether he should walk out on the Brexit talks, Europe's heads of states and government called on Downing Street to make the necessary moves to make an agreement possible. In a summit communiqué issued this afternoon, the leaders noted with concern that progress on the key issues of interest to the Union is still not sufficient for an agreement to be reached. They asked the EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, to continue negotiations in the coming weeks. A call for an intensification of talks, included in an earlier draft of the statement, was deleted by the time leaders signed it off. So we had been kind of expecting something like this to come out of this summit, Fatima. What do you make of the statement that the EU leaders have issued?
Well, we need to be realistic to the fact that we are the first country who has tried to leave the EU. It's not going to be easy for us to leave. So these conditions that we're seeing now, of course, they're expected. And you're talking to someone who never wanted to leave the EU in the first place. So I'm someone who would rather we just go back in. So in terms of the government making a deal, I have absolutely no faith that they will get a deal that wouldn't really make our country struggle in a way, because this is a government that's even said that they're going to break international law. So I feel that we have the wrong people at the negotiation table at the first place. So to be honest, when it comes to the discussions of the EU, my own concern is I want us to get back in. That's how I'm always going to conclude.
Yeah. When you look at the negotiations as they've proceeded, do you get the feeling that there will be some sort of a rabbit pulled out of a hat, whether it's a good deal or a terrible deal, but that Boris Johnson will be able to say, look, I've got a deal, and somehow try and sell it as a good thing. Do you think there will be any sort of deal?
I'm worried that we're going to end up with a no deal, because I think that's where Boris was planning to head anyway, with a hard Brexit. And for him to suggest, I think anything Boris suggests as good, I think we've been shown is not, considering with the internal market bill and how it's supposed to be a power surge, we're finding out it's a power grab. So I think anything that Boris decides to pull out of the hat and sugarcoat, you need to look behind it and see that it's not going to help us at all. So I think I can speak for many people in Scotland when I say that I'm worried about our future under Boris, and he's not going to get us a good deal.
Andrew, does Fatima speak for you?
Oh, absolutely. I'm in the west of Edinburgh, and 72% of the population around here voted to remain in the EU. So it's very clear that the continuing attempts to blow up the settlement and to blow up any prospect of a future agreement, which I agree with Fatima, I think was very much the intention of the Brexit jihadists who are behind Johnson and who really hold Johnson on a leash. I think there is still a very clear and present danger of a hard Brexit, or a Brexit agreement that is so thin that it has the effect of being a hard Brexit. And I think we're about to. I think in terms of trying to get to a deal, my prediction would certainly be that we are now just about at the stage where the Scottish fishing industry will be given away in return for passporting rights for the City of London into Europe. That would be that's my expectation of the next step. Whether that's enough to actually get a deal, I'm not entirely sure. But I think we will see Boris, who has, of course, has begun the process of throwing farmers under the bus. I think the Scottish fishermen, especially the pelagic fleet, are going to be next.
And when you look at the whole strategy, I mean, or the whole period, at least since the referendum, do you think this has been a kind of inevitability, or do you think this is something that the Tories have kind of painted themselves into a corner over?
Whilst it might not have been, the Tories told us it was not an inevitability back at the time of the referendum, but I think it's fairly plain that every single step since then, both by the previous Prime Minister and by this one, have in a sense painted the Tories into a corner, or it's funneled them down the red lines from the red lines at Lancaster House, and every step since then, it has made making a deal more and more difficult, not less and less difficult. And I suppose, in a sense, there is a sensation that we're watching a fairly serious road accident in slow motion here, but with the kind of fundamentalist approach that many of those who have sworn loyalty to Boris and so are in the cabinet, despite any lack of ability or talent, and others who stand beside Boris or who would stand beside Boris on the benches of the House of Commons if they were allowed in. I think their fundamentalist approach means that it probably was an inevitability. I'm reminded this week of that Steve Baker, who's a notorious ERG member, has a view that the European Union is in some way a religious plan and strategy by the Roman Catholic Church. And now, if people are holding beliefs like that and expressing them in public, I think it's inevitable that there's going to be a really significant problem.
And Fatima, just to come back to you on kind of the politics of this, we've discussed this a few times on the show, but I'm still curious about it. The Tories have thrown farmers under the bus. They're throwing fishermen under the bus. These are groups that have traditionally been very strongly Tory leaning. We're seeing them turn Kent into a car park, and Kent has been, strong ground for the Tories for a long time. They do seem to be just working to alienate a lot of their core support. What do you think is going on?
I don't think they were working to alienate anyone. It was how they were in the beginning. And we've just been led on false promises. And people are just waking up to the reality that the Tories are who they are, and which is dishonest and, frankly, willing to break every promise that they make. So I don't think that they're working against. They've just been who they are, and we're just waking up to it now. Some people, whereas I'd say as an SNP activist, I've been well aware of what the Tory government is like. So we are seeing farmers, we are seeing those in the fishing industry turn back, because the threat to the farmers is we're seeing a potential negative impact on British food standards and child health. Because under the EU, when we were a member of this EU, all the 27 member states had an equal say in how policies would be implemented. So, which included food standards. But now that we're with the UK, we're going to see a rollback on that. And of course, that's a threat to farmers. We need to be supporting our farmers to be able to uphold their food standards. So farmers are obviously seeing how their practices, their agricultural trade is going to come under immense threat. So we are seeing a lot of farmers, of course, turn against Tories. And it just takes, I think it took Brexit to make people realise that this is the kind of Tory government that we have. I think the EU was a sort of a shield and somehow stopped their practices from actually coming to light.
Well, we do move on now. And the SNP has said Boris Johnson will be personally responsible for inflicting mass unemployment and hardship on millions of families if he doesn't U-turn on reckless Tory plans to scrap the furlough scheme and cut universal credit. It comes as Dame Louise Casey warns that the UK faces a period of destitution where families can't put shoes on their children. The UK government's former homelessness advisor said the reduced support announced by the Tory government is not going to cut it, and warned, it's like you're saying to people, you can only afford 2/3 of your rent, you can only afford 2/3 of the food that you need to put on the table. There's this sense from Downing Street and from Westminster that people will make do. Well, they weren't coping before COVID. In an interview with the BBC, Louise Casey added, I have been in Whitehall for over 20 years. I've worked in the voluntary sector, and this is unprecedented. I remember the Thatcher era right through to now, and I have never worked in a situation where I'm so concerned about what's going to happen. The SNP Hello and welcome back. Hello and welcome back to Scotland at 7. We do apologise for that. We had a wee technical gremlin, which we are investigating, but we are hopefully able to stay on air now. So we'll just go straight back into the story we were getting on to when the stream cut out there. The SNP has said that Boris Johnson will be personally responsible for inflicting mass unemployment and hardship on millions of families if he doesn't U-turn on his reckless Tory plans to scrap the furlough scheme and cut universal credit. It comes as Dame Louise Casey warns that the UK faces a period of destitution where families can't put shoes on their children. The UK government's former homelessness advisor said the reduced support announced by the Tory government is not going to cut it, and warned, it's like you're saying to people, you can only afford 2/3 of your rent, you can only afford 2/3 of the food that you need to put on the table. There's this sense from Downing Street and from Westminster that people will make do. Well, they weren't coping before COVID. So Fatima, I'll come to you first here. What do you make of this intervention here from Dame Louise Casey?
She's completely correct. This sense that they're saying that people will make do just goes to show that we have a government that's far removed from people's reality for them to even come to that conclusion. We have seen the damage that Tory austerity has caused and policies such as the bedroom tax. And now we've seen governments and citizens literally beg the Tory government to extend the furlough scheme. And we're seeing it coming to a halt. We're seeing it coming to an end. We've seen a crash in the autumn budget as well. We've also seen them remove the autumn budget, we're not getting an autumn budget in Scotland. So Kate Forbes, who's the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, they'd of course call that out. How is Scotland meant to recover from COVID to an efficient level if we're having a lot of our funding held back from the UK government? So it is a worrying statement to hear from the government. It is a worrying course of action for them to take. And it just goes to show that we do have people in power who are far removed from the reality of the situation on the ground.
And this question of the support that the government has put in place, Dame Louise Casey said that she this was the worst she'd ever seen it, having lived and worked through the Thatcher era. She said this is as bad as it's ever been. What do you make of the question of how conditional the welfare or social security rather has become in the UK versus the policy that the SNP has been pushing of universal basic income?
Because we're seeing two governments who have clearly different priorities. With the SNP, I'm seeing priorities which include everyone. And for the Tory government, I'm seeing their priorities which just include some people. So when it comes to the Tory government and the policies that they push, they're clearly not doing it for everyone. Because if you're seeing the universal basic income is supposed to be a measure that would essentially give people an equal opportunity in life, whereas the Tory government are under the impression that if they want to promote this rhetoric that if you work hard, you'll gain more work. So they're essentially saying that people who work two jobs, nurses, for instance, that are using food banks, that they're not working hard enough because of this discriminatory system that they set up and this false narrative that they're perpetuating, that if you work hard enough, you will live better. So the Tory government have really set up this narrative that's completely discriminatory, and they really need to readdress their policies.
Well, we move on now, and the Metropolitan Police have said that MP Margaret Ferrier will not face any charges over an alleged breach of COVID travel restrictions because her positive test took place 3 days before the legal requirement to self-isolate came into force. The Met said it had investigated Ferrier's decision to travel to Glasgow from London the day after receiving results saying she was positive for COVID-19, but found that no breach of the new regulations had been committed. Andrew, I mean, technical decision there, but Margaret Ferrier not facing any charges. She has faced a lot of criticism, though, hasn't she?
She has, Kenny, and I think there's probably an argument here that even if there had been, even if she wasn't able to avoid prosecution on this fairly specific ground, that it wouldn't really be in the public interest to pursue a prosecution either, frankly. However, I think there are serious questions here with regard to the way in which Margaret Ferrier behaved, and also the manner in which she was being. She was operating within the political structures. I'm very surprised that she was unable to discuss her travel plans with anybody who could have helped to advise her. I'm surprised that if people were unaware of her, people who, her chief of staff and her close advisors were unaware of her own circumstances at the time, because they would at least have been in a position to assist her in taking what would have been the right decision, rather than in what I think she has said was a confused state, taking the wrong decision, and brought down upon her own head a great deal of abuse and attack, and has put herself in a situation where it certainly still appears to be very difficult for her to maintain her position as an MP.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll move on now. We are obviously a wee bit pushed for time, having lost a few minutes earlier. Scottish Green co-leader Patrick Harvey MSP this afternoon called on the Scottish Government to ensure that routine weekly testing of frontline workers plays a greater role in tackling the virus. In response to the First Minister's virtual statement to Parliament this afternoon, Mr Harvey noted that the Scottish Government's nosocomial review group approved a new hospital testing strategy in September and asked how this related to the Scottish Government's wider review of testing. So, Fatima, do you think Patrick Harvey is right? Do you think we need to be stepping up the routine testing of a lot of workers that are perhaps at higher risk?
I think the Scottish Government advice where if you are displaying symptoms, then you go and get a test, because we need to consider that we are dealing with services that are already pressed with time and resources. So this routine test, if we do have the facilities and we do have the resources to do so, then we can. But I don't think it's necessary if someone is not displaying symptoms or has been in close contact with anyone.
And Andrew, do you think there's a case for having the capacity to do this by now? I mean, we are sort of 8 months into the pandemic.
Yes, I think that it's been pretty clear for, I would say, at least 6 months that the approach that we were going to have to take would require a significant increase in the classes of those being tested, the speed with which those who would be tested would get the results, and in general terms, an industrialization of the testing capability and the testing processes, in order that they could better back up the trace and protect mechanisms as well, because the two work hand in hand, and whilst we're beginning to see them working in hand, I know of two people who have been self-isolating because the app has told them that they've been in close contact with somebody who has tested positive. So that side of the equation does seem to be working satisfactorily in Scotland. The challenge is that we need to significantly increase the testing and the speed of the testing if we're going to get as good a quality of data about the infection and the spread of infection, and all of the information that's required in order to really take the fight to the virus at a time when we don't yet have a vaccine available.
Yeah, well, thanks for that. We will move on now to the other side of the Atlantic. And Democratic vice presidential nominee Kamala Harris today abruptly cancelled her travel for the next few days after two people associated with the Biden-Harris campaign tested positive for coronavirus. This morning, it emerged that Harris had been on a flight this week with both individuals 2 days before they tested positive for COVID-19. The people testing positive were Harris's communications director, Liz Allen, and a non-staff flight crew member. Because Harris and those contacts wore medical-grade N95 face masks during the flight, and the infected individuals were not within 6 feet of the vice presidential nominee for more than 15 minutes, they do not meet the US Centre for Disease Control and Prevention definition of close contact. But Andrew, this is quite a story, isn't it? I mean, the president has already had the virus. Now we're seeing Kamala Harris choosing to self-isolate for a bit. Do you think this is possibly a little bit more political than health-related?
I think certainly with regard to the president, the point-blank refusal to provide any evidence of him testing positive does suggest, and his miraculous rebirth and his Cecil B. DeMille style return to the White House, I think there's more than a whiff of politics around about the president's behaviour. Surprise, surprise. By the same token, I think there's not the same evidence of chicanery on the part of the Biden-Harris campaign. That's not to say that chicanery isn't an important feature of all political activities in the United States during a presidential election, no matter which party, no matter which ticket. But I don't think we're yet at a place where we can say with any certainty what the situation is with regard to Liz Allen, the flight crew member, or Kamala Harris. However, the point that masks were worn and social distancing was maintained, as you suggest, is an important component in this story at this time, because it demonstrates that potentially it helps in keeping people safe.
Yeah, I think for an observer to have seen that Trump is out campaigning after his alleged miraculous recovery, while Kamala Harris is doing the sensible thing and staying at home for a bit, it does send a message, doesn't it, Fatima?
It definitely does because we're seeing Trump. He's set a dangerous precedent. You're seeing America has a really high rates of COVID, and there's President Trump immediately when he leaves the hospital takes off his mask. We even saw an interview of him telling a reporter to take off the mask, him suggesting that he can't hear the reporter, and then the reporter deciding to speak up. So we've got President Trump setting a dangerous precedent, and we've got Kamala Harris, as he said, doing the sensible thing. So I do think that there's a bit of politics involved with Trump's theatrics. He is a what shall I say? He is an actor. He is theatrical in his own politics. But when it comes to being sensible, we've got Kamala Harris. So that is a good thing to see, at least.
Yeah. Well, sticking to the US election, Twitter has temporarily restricted US President Donald Trump's election campaign account today, preventing him from tweeting, saying a video from the account about Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden's son violated its rules. Excuse me. The video posted by the @TeamTrump account referred to a New York Post story from Wednesday that contained alleged details of Hunter Biden's business dealings with a Ukrainian energy company and said the former vice president had met with an advisor of the company. Twitter said the video violated its rules against posting private information, adding that the account may need to delete the post in order to continue tweeting. It's going to all end up in a big lawsuit, and there are things that can happen that are very severe that I'd rather not see happen, but it's probably going to have to, Trump said when asked about the move by Twitter. Twitter said yesterday the Post story violated its hacked materials policy, which bars the distribution of content obtained through hacking that contains private information or trade secrets or puts people at risk of physical harm. Facebook and Twitter took proactive steps yesterday to restrict dissemination of the Post story in the hours after it was published. Twitter had placed similar restrictions on the account of White House Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany on Wednesday after she shared the Post story. So Andrew, I think the line that jumped out to me from this story was Trump saying this is all going to end up in a big lawsuit. It does look like there is going to be a lot of legal loose ends from this election, aren't there?
Oh, like you wouldn't believe. I was talking with friends during this week about the prospect of litigation once Trump leaves office, and I was pointing out that both I think the New York State Attorney and the District Attorney for Manhattan both have open litigation against Trump and the Trump Organization already, and so I think we're going to see a great deal of litigation after he is removed from office, with any luck, and that I think that whilst the lawyers will do well out of it, I think if history teaches us anything, or recent Trump history teaches us anything, it is that most of the lawyers who associate themselves with Donald Trump end up in jail themselves. And I think also most of Trump's surrogates and loudest supporters in the media have ended up in the jail as well. So a little bit of time at a state penitentiary might well be on the horizon here.
Mm. Well, we move on now, and the EU and UK imposed sanctions on top Russian officials close to President Putin today in an unexpectedly robust and swift response to the August poisoning of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. Pushed on by France and Germany, where Navalny was treated after collapsing on a flight from Siberia, the EU and UK targeted 6 Russians and a state scientific research centre accused of deploying a banned nerve agent designed for military use against the 44-year-old opposition politician. We Europeans remain committed to the fight against chemical weapons, French President Emmanuel Macron told reporters as he arrived at the EU summit today. He called for talks with Moscow. The Kremlin condemned the sanctions as a deliberate and unfriendly step against Moscow and promised retaliation. Fatima, do you think this, as we said, an unexpectedly robust response from the EU and UK will perhaps push Russia back into line a wee bit?
Well, we do need to stand firm in the fight against chemical weapons. So, to be honest, I'm a bit surprised it took this long and it took France and Germany to push the European Union and United Kingdom to impose sanctions on Russia, because I feel in a situation like this where we're not acting swiftly and promptly and with appropriate measures as they've done now, such as sanctions, we will continue to see instances where we're at risk, where countries are at risk of violating international law and threatening civilian lives. So yes, we do need to stand firm, and I just wish that European Union and United Kingdom did this earlier. And I am hoping that Russia will see this as a necessary measure and, of course, look into their own actions and their own use of chemical weapons.
We can only hope. But we move on now, and scientists from the University of Oxford have developed a rapid COVID-19 test able to identify the virus in less than 5 minutes, researchers said today, adding that it could be used in mass testing at airports and businesses. The university said it hoped to start product development of the testing device in early 2021 and have an approved device available 6 months later. The device is able to detect the virus and distinguish it from other viruses with high accuracy, the researchers said in the study. Our method quickly detects intact virus particles, said Professor Achilles Kapanidis at Oxford's Department of Physics, adding that this meant the test would be simple, extremely rapid, and cost-effective. Rapid antigen tests are said to be key in rolling out mass testing and reopening economies while the coronavirus is still circulating, and those that are already in use are faster and cheaper but less accurate than existing molecular PCR tests. Andrew, I'm not fully up to speed on the science, but if we're having testing that's going to be faster, easier to do, that's got to be a positive in anybody's book, isn't it?
Absolutely right, Kenny. And I would say I'm probably even further behind the science than you are. However, as I was saying earlier on in the programme, the need for industrialized processes for testing and then associating that with trace and protect is critically important, especially while we do not have a vaccine for this virus. And so, whilst we know that huge swathes of the pharmaceutical and the medical testing industries are focused on coming up with solutions and approaches here. And of course, it's only a cause of regret that, as we know, there's the medical testing industry in the United Kingdom is tiny, largely because it was unsupported. But the need to get onto the front foot with testing techniques, testing processes, and testing technology is really important. So this has to be a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And in our final story this evening, in a tweet today, East Dunbartonshire MP Amy Callaghan announced that after 4 months in hospital after suffering a brain hemorrhage, she was being discharged and would be going home. She thanked the miracle team at the Greater Glasgow and Clyde Physically Disabled Recovery Unit, calling them her second family. And Fatima, I mean, this is just wonderful news for Amy and everybody close to her, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, within the party, Amy is someone that many people look up to. She is a phenomenal MP. She is a force to reckon with, and she's been through a lot. And we've seen her champion the National Health Service in Parliament as well. She is a very strong individual, and she is a politician that we do need in Parliament. And it's great to see her come out fighting stronger, as she said she would. And yeah, I just hope that she continues to take care of herself, and we look forward to seeing her continue standing up for Scotland in Westminster.
Yeah, and Andrew, as Fatima says, she has been through a lot. She's a cancer survivor, and now this, she's still only 28. It is wonderful to see her out and looking healthy again, isn't it?
Oh, but apart from the personal aspect of this, which is tremendous to see her outside the hospital and see her looking so much better. Apart from that, which is the most important part, I think this is probably the only positive news story of the day, but it's a very positive news story. It's great to see it. It's a demonstration of just how tough she is, just how resilient and determined she is. It's also a demonstration of the level of care and attention that she has received from SNHS, And I think it's an indication of the capability both of our health services and of our people, that they can persist in the face of such medical difficulties and apparently be successful. So it's fantastic news. It's a great way to get towards the end of the week.
Yeah, absolutely. It's wonderful news. We had Amy on the show just before the election last year, and a really, really great guest. We would love to have her back as soon as she feels up to it. So our best wishes to Amy. And that is just about all we have time for. Thank you very much to Andrew and to Fatima for all their contributions today. It's always a pleasure to hear from both of you. And we'd like to thank you at home as well, especially for bearing with us through our technical problems today. It does lead me very nicely into asking you to send us some money, though, because obviously equipment does require upkeep, and some bits of our equipment might need some replacing at some point. So if you're able to help us financially, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up there as a supporter, and your £5 a month will make a huge difference to everything that we do here. It helps pay the bills. It potentially helps pay for staff. It obviously pays for equipment. So whatever, if you can support us, then please do. If you're not able to, we absolutely understand. We know times are tough for a lot of people. And we're not going to take the shows away from you. They will always be free to view online, but you can still help us out by following us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, by finding our Facebook page and liking that, by subscribing to our YouTube channel and clicking the bell icon there so that you know to get notified when we have a new show up. And then share these shows around with your friends and family. Let them know why you support Broadcasting Scotland. Word of mouth is by far the best way that we can advertise what we do here. And finally, we are, you will notice I'm here on a Thursday because Gordon couldn't be here. This is why we need more people as well. If you're interested in appearing on screen, doing the work that Gordon and I do, or whether you're interested in getting involved backstage, doing some of the journalism, some of the technical work to help us keep these shows going, then do please get in touch with us. There are lots of opportunities, whether you have skills or not, whether you have experience or not. We would just love to hear from you. And that applies across the country as well, because particularly thinking about the election next year, we're going to want journalists all over the country to report on the counts wherever they are. So do please get in touch with us if you've got any interest in helping us out with that. But that is just about all we have time for this evening. So once again, thank you very much to Fatima Joji and to Andrew Wilson. Thank you for watching. I'll be back on Sunday with the full Scottish, but until then, have a great weekend. Goodbye.